Hi guys and welcome back to yet another review. This time around I'm bringing you the PunchAudio Martilo. This is an IM sold by LINSOUL, where I got it from. It's an interesting IM being sold at what I consider to be a fair price when you consider the various aspects of the Martilo. Anyway, as I was saying, it's roughly priced at $300, just over $300 if I'm mistaken. And the Martilo, I think, has gotten its inspiration, or perhaps one of the sources of its inspiration was what was started a few years ago by Fat Freak. I hadn't, I haven't listened to a lot of Fat Freak IMs except for the Maestro, for the Maestro Mini, no, for the, except for the, yes, the Maestro Mini, exactly, my apologies. I was confusing it now with the Grand Maestro. And this, the Maestro Mini, when I listened to it, um, I found interesting the way that they were able to get away with that huge bass emphasis, something like 18 dBs or 16 or 18 dBs. I know it was something just absolutely ridiculous, but a lot of it was down to the fact that they had tuned the bass. Not only were they using a good quality driver, but the Fat Freak was careful to tune the bass in a way that it was basically flat by 200 hertz. It was more of a gliding style of bass, not a tucked style of bass, which we have seen now being used more commonly by various brands at various price ranges. I mean, KZ does it. But they were able to get away with that excessive bass, and give us an IM that, yes, was bass heavy. They had no intentions of being precise or politically correct, but it was overall an interesting listen. Although at the time, and I remember I compared it to the Legato, I found the Legato to be a far superior IM. It had very much the same sort of bass, and offered more or less the same sort of mids and highs that the Mini offered, and it did it at a quarter or a fifth of the price. So my main nitpick with the Fat Freak was you were paying at that time close to $500 for something that, in my opinion, was excessively overpriced. If you had told me that the Maestro Mini was $250, something of the sort, I said, okay, fine. But at $500, your expectations become a certain level. And that's where, just jumping a little bit here, that's where, for example, the current market has improved leaps and bounds. Yes, it's becoming more and more difficult to keep up, and more the IMs are copy pastes of each other. But the amount of performance that you're able to get from IMs today at under $500 far exceeds and surpasses the performance of IMs that cost 1,000 and below before, 1,500 and below before. I mean, the difference is day and night. And with regards here to the Martillo, it's an interesting take because they've taken the dual DD approach. They've taken two BAs by Knowles and a microplanar, put it all together and given it an overall signature, which is kind of a I would say that the Martillo is very much the Q years XHPB punch in terms of its upper frequencies, but then it kind of tucks in more the bass and cleans up more the bass as compared to the punch. I have not heard the punch, unfortunately, so I will not be able to delve too much into what the punch sounds like or doesn't sound like. But from what I've heard from other people, from the graphs that I've seen, even the graphs posted by HBB himself, and what I heard HBB talk about these two IMs himself, the punch and the Martillo have a lot in common, in terms of their sound. Um, the first thing that automatically and straight away jumps to your ears when you listen to Martillo obviously is the bass. The bass, it's got something like 14 to 15 dBs of gain. It's got oops, my apologies, let me just put here the graph so that while I'm actually speaking, I'm talking with the graph in front of me and I can better convey what I want to talk about. Okay, I believe it's this one. No, not this one. There we go. There we go. Amazing, amazing. Exactly, like I was saying. We are talking about a gain of 14.5 dBs, at least in my particular unit. My particular unit was flat by 200 hertz. I mean, nothing to be said there. And then it kind of just goes very, very, it goes very neutral, starts rising in a, let's call it a meta style of way. Why meta? Because it doesn't rise between 1 and 3 in a linear fashion. There's a slight dip at around 2 kilohertz, so it's got that meta kind of feel to it, and then it drops off again. The bass of the Martilo is phenomenal. End of story. If you are a bass head, this is the IM for you, period. Okay, it has very, very good bass. It's thick, lush, full-bodied, and much like the Cano Cristales, which I have here, the only real flaw that I can put to it is that with certain genres, all of that lushness, all of that thickness is kind of let down by the lack of speed to make it clean. So it could have all of that lushness, all of that greatness, but be a little bit more hard hitting. That's the only thing that on the Martilo I think is lacking. But having said that, and comparing it to the Cano Cristales very briefly, it is doing a better job than the Cano Cristales. Okay, it is. Is it a huge difference? No, but it is doing a slightly better job than the Cano Cristales. There's a little bit more incisiveness in the Martillo's bass presentation. And then you have mids, upper mids and treble, which are absolutely exquisite. What is the problem here of the Martillo? It's that you have the sound of two IEMs in one. And if earlier, or in another review, or rather, that I was talking about the Cano Cristales, and I said that there was sometimes a little bit of lack of cohesion between the drivers, and that especially at higher volumes, that lack of cohesion was noticed by a loss in terms of the polish that the upper mids and the mids on the Cano Cristales had. What you notice in the Martillo is that it's like you have the bass coming from one IEM, and then you have the mids, the upper mids and treble coming from another IEM. Both of them are doing their respective frequencies absolutely flawlessly, but they don't match each other. There are occasions where that matching is done actually quite well, I have to say. And if you are going to be listening mainly to EDM and rap and so on, you probably will not find this to be a problem. But because it has such incredibly good mids and highs, it is inevitable, at least with me it was, that I was wanting to go listen to it with stuff like Dominic Fil-Aim, Some Room to Breathe, or Moi Je T'aime as well from Dominic Fil-Aim. And there, it's where, to be truthful, it's not really too bad, because these two songs are not overly complicated. Okay, it's basically her voice that is the main thing here, and everything comes together pretty decently. But when you listen to Carol Duboc, then you notice that slight mismatching. Okay, it's not, to be honest, it's not a deal breaker in my opinion. It's not, because the person that buys the Martillo is buying the Martillo for its incredibly good bass, and for the fact that it's a non-fatiguing presentation, and that it will give you hours and hours and hours of bass gasms, let's put it this way, without being at the same time looking for the ultimate in terms of execution and perfection and clarity and detail and so on and so forth. Having said that, I was impressed with how good it was actually doing with, let's say, Japanese roots, with how good it was doing with other more, let's say, audiophile oriented genres. I mean, stuff like Swept Away by Carl Duboc, it wasn't bad. It was actually not too bad. La Belle Dame Sans Regrets, it wasn't a bad playback. It was doing it really good. House of Groove by Eugene Groove was actually quite a pleasant surprise. It was actually more capable than I was expecting. And if there's one thing that I will give the Martilo is, because of the way that the mids, upper mids and treble have been tuned, it actually benefits from you cranking it up a little bit, while maybe the Cano Cristal is at slightly less than ideal higher volumes. If you want to maintain your hearing, it loses a little bit of that composure in the upper mids, or in the mids to upper mids transition. Here the Martilo actually benefits from it. So it's an IM that seems to kind of clear its throat, and everything falls into balance, and even that mismatching that I was talking about kind of fades away. So I would say that definitely this is an IM that will shine at higher volumes, with more genres at higher volumes. Analog by Soul Persona, for example, at lower volumes it was a little bit overpowering in the bass. It just sounded a little over thick. But the moment I crank it up a little bit, wow, like I have to be totally honest, I was thoroughly impressed. Elephant by Carol Duboc, again, really good, slightly higher volumes. At lower volumes, it felt overly thick. A Little Fusion G Minor by Jacques Lassois Trio, really good, considering the type of sound that this IM was intended to do. I have absolutely not, I cannot truthfully fault it. I would go as far as saying that, for example, and let me just see if I have it here. I believe it's this one. Yes, okay. I would even go as far as saying that the Martilo and the QES Astral, for those of you that don't know, is an IM that I really enjoy. I think it's probably one of the better IMs, or one of the IMs that I've liked the most from QES. Okay, I would go as far as saying that, were it not the fact that it has that crazy amount of bass, okay, the Martilo has a lot in common, or a lot more in common with the QES Astral than what you would think. Okay, in terms of the overall signature, actually it's very similar. The difference is, because you have two dynamic drivers here handling the bass, you have that extra amount of let's say air being moved. And so when you look at the graphs, yes, it seems like it's kind of the same sort of bass performance, but in terms of overall volume, this has way more volume. And by having way more volume, which is again something that the graphs cannot tell you, it doesn't sound anything like the Astral, because it's just overpowering. Now when you crank up the volume, yes, then you start getting a little bit more of that Astral feel. And what do I mean by that Astral feel? The Astral, in terms of its mids, upper mids and treble, is a really good IEM. It is seriously one of the most impressive IEMs I've heard of as of late. And the more I listen to it, the more impressed I am. For a 1+6, so not a complicated configuration, nothing out of this world, they've done their work really well. So I mean, this is high praise here for the Martilo, considering that that's not it's let's say ideal territory. So bass we've talked about, mids, upper mids and treble I think we've talked about. Technically, yes, okay, the tone and tonality will be a little bit overpowering. It's overly thick. So I'm gonna say I like it, but I don't think it will be everybody's cup of tea. In terms of soundstage and imaging, again, depending on the song, you will be impressed by it. Yes, you will. Detailed retrieval, the same thing. And resolution, I think, will probably be the least capable, because even at higher volumes, although it helps, it's still not a very high. There's still not a high level of resolution from the Martilo. With regards to what I've got here for a very brief comparison, they share common DNAs, but in terms of the overall signature of the sound, of how the graph is, let's put it that way at least, but they sound totally different to each other. Okay, and this again is another example of what I was just saying earlier. I mean, you look at graphs, and the graph can actually the two IMs can have absolutely the same graph, but depending on the configuration of the IM, the sound is going to be different, guaranteed, you know, very much so. And that's exactly what happens here, because we have on the Cano Cristales we have a 2 plus 8, here we have a 2 plus 2 plus 1, and here we have a 2 plus 4 plus 1. So the Tansio Mirai uses 4 BAs, 2 DDs, not in an isobaric configuration, they actually are coaxially mounted, the DDs, and then it uses not really a driver, it's you could say it's I don't even know what to call it. It's more to control the pressure, internal pressure of the cavity and of the bass drivers, and thus help improve the bass performance than anything else. And like I said, so 3 different approaches here to having dual dynamic drivers. 3 curves which actually look surprisingly similar. I mean, let me just take away how quickly this, put here the Tansio Mirai so that afterwards I can show you. The interesting thing about the Tansio Mirai obviously is the fact that it's got those switches. It allows for a lot of versatility in the way that it can sound, and then the Cano Cristales. So I would say that these 3 in terms of the bass sound very similar, and they all kind of sound very similar up to about 3K. The difference is that the Cano Cristales will definitely be the one that's got the more forward sounding mids, the more energy in the mid, so that a mid to upper mid area is the one that's going to be the most intense. The Tansio will be second place, and the Martilo will be the least intense in that department. That least intensity in that part of the spectrum does confer the fact or the bonus of being less fatiguing it, but at the same time at lower volumes it loses a lot of detail, in both the Cano Cristales and the Tansio Mirai will be more alive. Okay, once you put the volume, or you try to match the volumes to a level that falls within, let's say, the ideal performance of the 3 IMs, then you start getting a better feel of how they sound. The Cano Cristales always comes across as the most intense in terms of the mids. That's without question. This slightly behind that, with a tamer higher end, so the treble here sounds a little bit less prominent, and this is the one that sounds, in my opinion, the most coherent, from the mids to upper mids to the treble. It's very nicely done. There's really nothing that I can point as a negative aspect in the way that it's been tuned. What happens is, because of the amount of bass we have coming from behind, it just is overpowered at lower volumes, and for you to extract the best of it, you have to give it a little bit more stick. It's the least fatiguing. So I would say that probably this will be the one. If you like listening to higher volumes, this will probably be the best choice. The Martilo and the Tansio Mirai will probably be the best choices. Although, you know, I'm not wanting to in any way sign the deal on that. I don't think the Cano Cristales will be significantly behind, because it's going to be very much dependent on an individual basis. And if you are able to fit the Cano Cristales deep, you will definitely see that a lot of this small little nitpick that I had with regards to that driver coherence and even scaling will be very much mitigated. This is definitely the one that's going to be the best suited for, you know, EDM. So if you want to rock your world, this is definitely the one. And the Tansio Mirai has going for it the fact that it allows that versatility in terms of the tuning of the bass. So, you know, there's no real winners here. I would say that they all have pluses and minuses. $399, $399, $329 if I'm mistaken. Yes, the Martilo has the price going for it. They would probably be more complementary to each other than necessarily one standing out as the winner. As for the Martilo by itself, like I said before, and just before I show you the graphs, really impressive. I have to admit that I was not expecting it, let's put it that way, to a certain extent. I was expecting something that was going to be overly thick and just you know, a mud fest ultimately. Anyway, let me just show you the graph so we can wrap this up. Okay guys, so here we have now the graph for the Martilo, and as I mentioned earlier, you can see that huge bass curve that is tucked in at 200 hertz, so no bleed, no nothing. It really is really well done. The only thing is that it's overpowering, but you know, you buy the Martilo because you want overpowering bass, but that overpowering bass has been well done, well executed. It's just maybe the occasional lack of speed that is the only nitpick that I can put. As for the mids, upper mids and treble, I mean, this is really good. This is really good. Very suave in terms of the way the pinna gain is done. Nothing aggressive. We're talking about a pinna gain of roughly, give or take, 6-7 dBs, 7 dBs at the very most. Yeah, let me see. Yeah, roughly 7 dBs. So nothing too prominent. And it shows when you listen to it. You can feel that this area here is perfectly executed. Obviously it's overpowered at lower volumes by the bass, but once you crank it up, the Martilo does come alive and it shows its colors really nicely. I didn't find the microplanar to in any way be overpowering or shouty or you know, tuned in a manner which wasn't pleasant. No, none of that. And overall, the sound, yes, although bass heavy, is a sound that I was impressed. It's got a really good balance. And you know, going to what I was talking about, the QE's Astral, and let me just change the color here to black so it's a little bit more noticeable. As you can see here, the Astral graphs almost the same as the Martilo. Obviously, because we are talking about a 1+6, we have a totally different configuration, or rather a total different way of doing the same sort of graph. So the bass, although it's really big and you know, also we're talking close to 14 dB gain, it's no way as visceral as the bass on the Martilo. It doesn't have the impact of the Martilo. And then the mids, upper mids and treble, although they graph the way they graph, which is again very similar to the Martilo, they are significantly more alive. And at mid to low volumes, the QE is very balanced, it's very, as the name implies, astral, very open, very airy, very good sounding IM. Even the fact that the BAs have been tuned in this more than, let's say, ideal way of doing the BA tuning for the higher frequencies, which can, you know, let them become a little bit less polished, a little bit more metallically. Even in the Astral, I can't really point it as a negative aspect because it's been really well done. Maybe they've selected really good BAs, maybe they've done some tuning mojo, I don't know. Whatever they did it well. And the fact is that it's at higher volumes for the Martilo, where it allows for this part of the spectrum to come alive, they sound surprisingly similar. They sound way more similar with certain songs, obviously, than you would think. Obviously, if the song has got a more bass prominent, automatically you can identify which is the Martilo and which is the Astral, the QEs. And at mid to low volume, I mean, it's dead easy to identify one and the other. But at the let's say the right volume with the right song, it won't be an easy 1-2 thing. Okay, it really won't. You'll have to listen a little bit more carefully, and then you will notice, okay, there's a little bit less detail, and it's because you got a little bit way more bass. Other than that, I mean, I can't fault the Martilo in the way that it's been tuned in this part of the spectrum. The mids, upper mids, and treble are really well tuned. Comparing it then to the other two IMs that I mentioned, the Cano Cristal is very similar, and then straight away here, as you can see, sorry, that more forwardness in the mids, which makes it stand out significantly more, and that's where you will notice the biggest difference between these two IMs. One is more mid to low volume focused, the other one will be more mid to high volume focused, the Martilo. And then the other one is the QEs. And let me just, as I said, the QEs can be used with various tuning switches. I like using it with the 011 configuration. It just sounds the most balanced for me, which is this one here. And again, very similar bass, the way the mids rise in terms of the gain, everything very similar. Surprisingly, It not as much as extension as the graph would lead you to believe on the one hand, and the bass, although similar, it's not as let's say visceral, not as authoritative as the bass of the Martilo. Okay, that's the reality. But again, if the careful matching is done in terms of volume, you will be very impressed by how similar, and surprised by how similar they sound. Anyway, guys, that's my take on the Martilo. I think it's a solid IM, an IM that is worthwhile you considering if you're looking for this sort of style of sound. And like I said, if you already have the Tansio Mirai, I would say that it's more of a side grade to the Tansio Mirai, because it does do enough to justify you also owning it. And the same thing goes for the Cano Cristales. If you perhaps already have the Cano Cristales and you are thinking, should I have bought the PunchAudio instead, or is the PunchAudio the better option? Well, I think they are again good side grades to each other. The one has got that crazy big bass, but with more mids and highs, let's put it, which is the case of the Cano Cristales, and so more detailed, let's put it, at the lower volume. The other one, the Martilo, will give you that crazy bass for long hours, non-fatiguing. I mean, it's a really a nice IM. I was truthfully not expecting this sort of performance. Guys, as always, like and subscribe. Any questions, please feel free to ask me. Take care now. Bye bye.